Well, thank you so much, Anne. Yangu galanyin nalawiri, dani nanawaldara. Wangara lijinyin, marani bulan bagarabang. I acknowledge we're gathered on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and we recognise and honour their elders past and present. And thank you too, Greg, for your introduction. I'm really thrilled to be here tonight. This is my third forest industry event in the last month. And, you know, the forest industry is one that is as old as Australia. When the Ngunnawal people were caring for this country 60,000 years ago, they were harvesting the timber and forest products of this region to make all of the things they needed. Their utensils, their tools, their houses, everything that they needed. And so it has been the ultimate renewable resource of which Anne spoke, the forestry industry. It is an industry that is as ancient as mankind itself, but as new and as modern as the latest engineers, the most modern, most sophisticated engineers in science that I'll talk about in a moment. You know, in Tasmania just a little while ago, I saw how James Neville Smith, running a 100-year-old family business, turned sustainably grown native timber into beautiful flooring. But also, you have so much modernity and dynamism. Above all, this is an industry that it looks to the future, to advanced manufacturing, to biofuels, new carbon-positive building products, such as XLAM's new cross-laminated timber plant near Wodonga, the first of its kind in Australia, and I'm really looking forward to visiting the plant when it opens. And I want to acknowledge the work of the Forest Industry Advisory Council, in particular its chair, Rob DeFagley. We go back a long way. It's good to see you again. The vision in your recent report into how to transform the industry is simple yet profound. Expand into the bioeconomy to triple your value by 2050. Or put another way, the right trees in the right place at the right scale. And of course we have to remember that in Australia not only do we have a lot of trees, and I'll come to that in a moment, but we have an extraordinary diversity of trees. I mean, think simply of the eucalypt species. It goes from the snowy peaks of the snowy mountains all the way up to the tropics. It goes from the snow line to the tropics. 800 species in total. Rich in diversity. I would think, the most beloved Australian emigrant ever. If the Ecuadorians, in fact, put it on their national stamps and celebrate it. And of course, but it's all one species. It's all, as far as I could tell when I was in Peru anyway, it all seemed to be E. globulus subspecies bicostata, which is the Victorian Urabi, a larger tree than the Tasmanian one. But that's all one species, and of course, outside of Australia, they don't have the Australian insect, so they seem to be even healthier, and they coppice too. Anyway, I'm digressing. I'm very keen on trees. It is a brilliant industry. Now, few understand how important the role you play in capturing carbon and advanced manufacturing. I mean, think of this. All of this timber here is 50% carbon. So you talk about capturing carbon or biosequestration. Plant a tree, turn it into a house, turn it into a floorboard, turn it into a wall, and you are taking carbon out of the atmosphere and holding it and storing it. Now, the technologies you're using nowadays, ultrasounds, robotic precision manufacturing, and of course the emerging world of biomaterials, all add to the sophistication of the industry. Today, your industry accesses just 5.5 million hectares of the 125 million hectares of native forest, sustainably harvesting just 0.5% annually with regeneration after harvest. Today, the plantation estate stands at 2 million hectares and makes up about 80% of the whole sector's economic contribution. But I think, and I know Rob would be very keen on this too, I think there is a lot more that can be done in terms of plantations. So many more species, Australian species I'm talking about as well, that can be planted in plantations. Large, because of the purposes for which the plantations were designed, they tend to be limited to a few species, the one I mentioned, and of course shining gum as well. But it is the richness of our forest resource. Your earlier speaker, I came in halfway through the speech, was talking about the beautiful decorative timbers in this building. There is an enormous richness in Australian timbers. If you look at some of the old Australian timber and you look at the beautiful flecked veneers, the pale timber with the black flecks of casuarinas, a tree that most people would not regard as a particularly beautiful tree in itself, other than sometimes if you see a particularly big one along a creek bed. But nonetheless, there is so much richness in all of our trees, and we can do so much more with them. This is an industry that I think it has a great resource, but it's an enormous resource, but in many respects its greatest resource is you. And it is wonderful that you're so committed, you're so inspired, you're so determined to do more. And the ambitions you described of exporting more is so important. We should be a forest industry international powerhouse. We have the trees, we have the great industry, we have the science. What we need to do is get on with it. And I can assure you, as you'll hear in a moment, we're very committed to helping you do that. Now, we understand that you have long lead times and you need long-term certainty, so it's vital that governments get the policy settings right. So tonight I'm very pleased to announce that Anne Ruston will help us develop a new government plan that will underpin growth in the renewable timber and wood fibre industry. Anne's work and our new government plan will give you the vision and the certainty you need. We're committed to developing this industry as a growth engine for regional Australia, and that's why we've made the investments and decisions that Greg mentioned in his opening remarks. Greg made the telling point that we're the 7th most forested nation, and yet we import so much more timber than we export. And that's what we've got to change. Now, I mentioned James Neville Smith before. His business depends on secure timber supply under our extended regional forest agreements and affordable energy to drive his mill. Rising energy prices, which Greg mentioned, are placing a huge burden on your industry. They're taking too much out of household budgets as well. We must bring them down, and we're taking unprecedented action to do so. Now, our energy policy is driven by economics and engineering, not ideology. Our focus is on affordability and reliability, which is critical to your industry and so many others across the nation. We're working hard to secure Australia's energy future, which means ensuring Australians have access to reliable, baseload or dispatchable power, not just today, but in the months and years ahead. So we've taken action recently and commissioned the energy market operator, AEMO, to analyse the future of dispatchable power in our energy market in the immediate short term, the medium term and longer term. And their finding, that you'll all have read about in the news, is that the closure of the Liddell Power Station in New South Wales in 2022 will create a large gap in reliable baseload power in the national electricity market, in the East Coast essentially, and South Australia. I've made it clear that we will not allow this gap in baseload power to occur. So naturally we are exploring all options to fill this gap. We cannot have another event like the closure of Hazelwood, which, whatever you may think of the Hazelwood Power Station, its closure at such short notice, taking so much dispatchable power out of the energy market, caused a dramatic rise in wholesale energy prices. In New South Wales alone, it was over $50 a megawatt hour, nearly doubled the wholesale price of electricity. So, ideology and good intentions are not enough. You have to be very hard-headed about this. And equally, you've got to be prepared to say that if engineering and economics are your guide, you will have an all-of-the-above approach. All technologies have an important role to play. Biomass is one, of course, you're very familiar with. But equally, if you are going to have, as we have and will in the future, a large share of your energy generation coming from renewable sources, wind and solar, we recognise that the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. But until recently, as a nation, we've paid very little attention, if any, to the need to provide storage to back those renewables up. And so that is why we are getting on with the largest renewable energy, the largest storage project. It's the largest storage project ever undertaken in Australia, and it'll be the largest in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's the largest renewable project since Snowy 1, Snowy Hydro 2.0. It will add 2,000 megawatts of generation, of storage, to be able to deliver 2,000 megawatts for 7.5 days. That's how, because it's connecting two big dams with about 700 metres difference in head. Connecting those two will enable energy to be stored when it's cheap, in the middle of the night when windmills are blowing and no one's particularly interested in buying it, and then used when it's in greater demand, when your mills are running, when people are at home turning on all their appliances. In Tasmania, we believe there is an enormous opportunity for Tasmania to become a battery for the rest of Australia. And really on the same scale as Snowy Hydro. Hydro Tasmania is a huge hydro resource which has been neglected for a long period of time. Tasmania has the best wind resource in the country. It's got huge capacity utilisation factors because, as the Tasmanians know, on the west coast it's very windy, and the opportunity to marry that, the ability to store so much energy and dispatch it when you need to. Imagine what that adds to your renewable energy base, to dispatchability, to reliability, to affordability. Now, all of those things, of course, take time. You can't snap your fingers and build them, in a week. So that's why it's vitally important that we don't allow there to be unplanned closures of major generators, unless there should be no unplanned closures, but where there is a closure, there must be a plan to replace the energy it provides and the quality of dispatchability that it provides. Because, a windmill or a solar panel does not replace baseload power. It may, over a year, generate a similar amount of electricity, but that reliability, that 24/7 availability is critically important. So you can see that what we're focused on is not a debate between coal on the one hand or renewables on the other. Our focus is on affordable, reliable energy for all Australians, for your industry and every other Australian industry. And of course, meeting our emissions reduction obligations that we've entered into. And of course, your industry represents an enormous opportunities now and continuing in line with our policies in terms of emissions abatement and carbon offsets. Now, I was delighted with Anthony Pratt's most recent commitment to invest $2 billion over 10 years, creating 5,000 new high-paying manufacturing jobs. I was in Tumut with him when he announced that, and of course, I love going to Tumut. My father was born there, so I'm a citizen by descent of Tumut. This, of course, builds on the more than 10,000 jobs created in your industry since the Coalition came to office. Now, over the last year, we've seen 240,000 new jobs created in Australia. This just shows what you can do when you have confidence, the right technology, the right leadership, the right vision, and the right investment. When businesses are confident, when they know the government backs them, they invest and they hire. That's why we're cutting company tax. Why are we doing that? It increases the return on investment. What happens when you increase the return on investment? You get more investment. What happens when you get more investment? You get more jobs. and you get more high-paying jobs. That used to be a bipartisan proposition, and the debate used to only be about when it was affordable. Now, apparently, it's no longer a bipartisan proposition. But I can tell you, we haven't abandoned economic common sense. We know that if you cut business taxes, you'll get more investment in your industry and every other industry and more jobs. So I'm delighted to be here with you tonight. I'm sorry I can't stay for the rest of the evening. You have a wonderful, fascinating, sustainable Australian industry. It's the ultimate renewable industry, let's face it. As Anne said, trees just keep on growing. And your commitment to it makes me proud, it makes every Australian proud, and I wish you every success in the years ahead. Thank you.